Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank you all for taking out your precious time from your busy schedule. This webinar is organized by BANAI, Behavioral and Neuroscience Academy of India. BANAI is a non-for-profit organization formed in 2012, and since then, it has organized more than 200 programs nationally and internationally. The main focus of BANAI is to provide contemporary cutting edge on behavioral neuroscience. BANAI is formed and runs under the guidance and chairmanship of Dr. E. Mohandas. BANAI welcomes everyone and anyone who is interested to join. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Dr. Abdul Majid as the moderator for today's webinar. Thank you, Dr. Abdul Majid, for accepting to be the moderator for today's webinar. Dr. Abdul Majid, he is a senior consultant psychiatrist, currently working as associate professor at Sher-e Kashmir Institute of Medical Science and Medical College, Srinagar. Dr. Abdul Majid is the Honorary General Secretary of IPS North Zone and Honorary General Secretary of IAGMH. He was the direct council member of IPS from 2017 to 2020 and currently is the chairperson Disaster Management Task Force of the Indian Psychiatric Society. I would now request Dr. Abdul Majid to take over and introduce our chairpersons for today's webinar. Over to you, Dr. Abdul Majid.
Thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to thank BANAI and the team headed by Professor E. Mohandas for the present webinar. Very good evening to all of you, to the panelists, to the participants. Assalamu alaikum, namaskar, and adab, everybody. It's a moment of pleasure to share the panel with Professor Vihang Vahia sir and Dr. Jayanta Das, my dear friend, and most importantly, the man of the moment, that is Dr. Ravi Gupta, who is the speaker for the session. And we understand that the topic he would be talking about would be introduced by Dr. Vihang Vahia. I think no other than him can do the best honors of introducing the topic of obstructive sleep apnea. So I think most of the people in the participant group and in the panelists, we know him very well for his flamboyant and extempore speaking abilities and communication skills that he has. He is a very, very senior consultant in Breach Candy Lilavati Hospital in Mumbai. He has a list of assignments and tasks that he has been doing over the period of time, and most important of them being he has been the member of DSM-5 Task Force of Indian Psychiatric Society. He is member National Advisory Board of Indian Association of Private Psychiatry. He has been former chairman of CME committees of IPS and IAPP. He is an international distinguished fellow of American Psychiatric Association. And most importantly, whenever I would see him in various CMEs and conferences, he is always smiling the way he's smiling right now. And we have honor of having Professor Vihang Vahia with us as the chairperson, who would introduce the topic. And then we have Dr. Jayanta Das, who is the second chairperson. He is my dear friend from far away from Kashmir in Guwahati, in other part of India. He is a senior consultant psychiatrist. He is a founder president of Monoramoy, a community healthcare foundation. He has been past president of Indian Psychiatric Association of Private Psychiatry, Guwahati branch, and he's a national chairperson of School Mental Health Division of Indian Psychiatric Society. He has been involved in many activities at national and international level. May I hand over the mic to Professor Vihang Vahia to introduce the topic and the speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Majid, and thank you, BANAI, for asking me to be here this evening. It was the year of 2011 when I was attending the APA, and I think that was Philadelphia, where my son and I were sharing a room, and a friend of his 1 year junior colleague, 10 years older than him in age, came in to the room near midnight to share our room because he had nowhere else to go. And he was carrying with him a duffel bag with what looked like a suction machine. And I was a little surprised. I was curious of why should a man be carrying a suction machine around him. And at midnight, he told me the story. He said for the past 6 to 7 years, his career was going down. He was not progressing in the career. He was not able to focus and concentrate at his work. Multiple professors reprimanded him. He nearly lost his residency because he was not performing as expected, till somebody diagnosed an obstructive sleep apnea. And a year before this time that I met him, he had started using this CPAP machine, which was a huge suction-like machine. But he said that was a complete career changer in his life. Not just a career, it was a life changer machine for him. He said he was married. When I met him the first time, he had a 2-year-old daughter. And he said he never felt like playing with the child. His wife was upset with him. And generally, life was getting terrible. And the moment he started using, not moment, but soon after he started using the CPAP machine, it was a complete life changer. His daughter found a father, and the wife found a husband. And most of all, he found himself. Since then, his career has been going up. He completed his post-graduation. He was a senior consultant when I last met him at one of the hospital chains. And the last I heard was that he had become the psychiatrist of the prison in California. Such is the impact of sleep apnea. For the longest time ever in my 45 years of psychiatry, we always looked upon sleep disturbance as a manifestation of anxiety or depression with or without psychosis or substance use. And we kept pumping our patients with sleep-inducing or sleep-normalizing tablets. We use melatonin, we use all kinds of things, not always successfully. Till we now learned that sleep medicine is a specialty. We now know that sleep medicine needs to be looked into with greater intensity. We now have sleep labs which give us very clear diagnosis. And most of all, the CPAP machines have progressed so much, the research, that I'm sure in less than no time, we'll probably land up with a pocket model of a CPAP. To hear more about all the research, we have Dr. Gupta with us, who's going to explain to us what this obstructive sleep apnea is all about. But more important, or probably most important for the participants, is that you can ask as many questions as you want. And the best question, rated by me, Dr. Das and Dr. Majid, nobody can question our choice, but the person who's rated as the best question will get a voucher of 5,000 rupees sent immediately. But the decision that Dr. Majid, Dr. Das and I take, it cannot be challenged. Over to you, Dr. Majid and Dr. Das. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Majid, now is it my turn?
Yes, please go ahead. You can introduce our speaker for the evening, Dr. Ravi Gupta. Please introduce him and he would start the...
Thank you so much. Good evening, Dr. Ravi Gupta, Vahia sir, and my dear friend, Dr. Majid, and all the participants in today's, who have participated in today's Banai webinar. Thank you, Banai, for offering me this prestigious platform to chair the session. Especially, it's my honor that I have been chairing this session. I'm sharing this session with Dr. Vahia sir. That's a great privilege, sir. Thank you so much. I have a very deep regards for you. And now, I'd like to congratulate Banai, especially for choosing this particular topic. I think, and the title also has been, chosen, is a very aptly chosen. Barely recognized and rarely diagnosed. I think this is a wonderful thing about to introduce this topic for the psychiatrists especially, because as Vahia sir has already mentioned that this is one area which we most of the time in our clinical practice probably we ignore to evaluate or to go deep into it. So we have a privilege to hear from Dr. Ravi Gupta today, and I have the most pleasant task of introducing our speaker, Dr. Ravi Gupta. He is an additional professor, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, working in the Department of Psychiatry and the Division of Sleep Medicine, Rishikesh. This is wonderful, sir, that you have a special division of sleep medicine in your institute. And secondly, his research interest includes neuropsychiatric and sleep disorders like headache, restless leg syndrome, insomnia, and obstructive sleep apnea, which is today's topic. He serves as an expert reviewer for many international journals like Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery, and Psychiatry, Journal of Psychiatry and Neuroscience, World Journal of Biological Psychiatry, and many others. He has contributed approximately 90 publications in the fields of psychiatry, headache, and sleep medicine in various peer-reviewed national and international journals. So, Dr. Ravi Gupta, so everybody is very keen and very eager to hear from you. Now, over to you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind words and kind introduction. I'm really thankful to the Banai for on this really interesting topic, OSA in psychiatry practice, which is rarely diagnosed and barely treated. And it's my privilege to be presenting in a session where Dr. Vihang Vahia is the chair, because at least I can say he is my guru, especially when it comes to the scientific presentations. I have grown up looking at his presentations, his style, and I try to copy him. So, sir, you may find something which is similar to your style. Kindly apologize me if I try to copycat you. So with this,
I'm thrilled to hear this, Dr. Gupta, and it's wonderful to have someone even think of copying me, though I didn't really realize it was all that good. But thank you very much. I'm grateful.
Yes, sir. That is all mine, sir. So in today's talk, we will discuss about whether this OSA in psychiatry practice is really common. Then we will try to look other way around. What are the prevalence of psychiatric disorders in patients with obstructive sleep apnea? Now I'm looking at the picture from both these sides, because ultimately the patients are going to land up with the psychiatrist. And then we will try to look at the clinical implications of having the OSA among the patients who are having comorbid psychiatric disorders. Then we will discuss in brief how to diagnose OSA. Then we will discuss in brief the management of OSA, and then I will summarize my presentation. So first, I'll try to focus on the various studies which have shown that OSA is prevalent among the patients who are treated with for the psychiatric disorders. So this was basically the first of the paper that I could found, and it clearly mentions obstructive sleep apnea and schizophrenia are research agenda. Before that, we had few studies mostly published in Sleep and Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine. And this was first recognized somewhere in 1995, but from 1995 till this paper came, I could find only 5 or 7 studies. So OSA was more or less ignored part, especially when it comes to the psychiatry practice. And as you can see here, this paper included some of the studies which were case control, then comparison, then retrospective survey, and they found that the patients were diagnosed with for the sleep apnea using various kinds of polysomnography machines, and they found that the patients with the psychiatric disorders, they were having higher prevalence of obstructive sleep apnea compared to the controls. As you can see in the first study, 48%, second study, you can see 15%, then 44%. So we can see that if we talk about the psychotic disorder, the prevalence of OSA clearly outweighs that of general population. And in India, if we talk about the prevalence of OSA, Dr. Sharma from AIIMS New Delhi published a review article in 2011 in Indian Journal of Medical Research, and there he quoted 3 studies from different parts, 2 from Delhi and 1 from Chennai, and those studies reported that the prevalence of OS in the community, it varies between 8 to 13%. So we can see that patients with schizophrenia, they definitely have much higher prevalence of OSA compared to the general population. Now the question is, when we say that the patients with schizophrenia, they have higher prevalence of OSA, so what are the possible reasons for that? First, the schizophrenia patients, they mostly are on the antipsychotic medications, and we all know that antipsychotic medications, they cause the weight gain. And we all know that the higher BMI or the obesity is associated with the obstructive sleep apnea. So it increases the risk for the obstructive sleep apnea. But more importantly, this paper mentioned that the prevalence of OSA among the patients with schizophrenia was out of proportion with their anthropometric measures. That means obesity alone was not able to explain the higher prevalence of OSA in these patients. So this study looked at the possibility whether the antipsychotics, they themselves can have some kind of neural changes that can lead to the appearance of obstructive sleep apnea. And they found, quoting some previous papers, that the antipsychotic medications, they can directly influence the activity of respiratory center through the dopamine mechanisms, and it can actually it can also change the tone of the upper airway. And we all know that obstructive sleep apnea is basically a pathology of the upper airway, where the pharyngeal muscles, they get flaccid, flabby, and they become so pliable that the upper airway gets closed during the end of expiration and early inspiration. Then the issue, why should we look for the patient for the OSA among the patient with schizophrenia? So we all know that patients with schizophrenia, they have cognitive, mood, and negative symptoms as well. And as clearly mentioned by the imagine that these patients who are having OSA, but they are otherwise asymptomatic, they can go overlooked and they can be misdiagnosed as having comorbid depression or negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Then it is important so that we have adequate knowledge. It is important so that we can adequately manage the patient, because if we can treat the patient for the OSA, probably we will not give the antipsychotics which are actually not needed, or antidepressants which are not needed, considering that these patients might be having the mood disorders or the negative symptoms. Then we all know that patients with schizophrenia, they have metabolic syndrome. They are prone to develop coronary artery disease, hypertension, diabetes, and the other evidence of the research clearly mentions that the OSA itself can is associated, not cause, but I would say rather associated with metabolic syndrome, obesity, coronary artery disease, and diabetes mellitus. So there is a possibility that the metabolic syndrome in the patients with schizophrenia is routed or mediated through the obstructive sleep apnea. So to assess this question, we did a small study which was published in 2018 in the Indian Journal of Psychiatry. So we looked at the patients who were on the antipsychotic medications for variable period, and we looked at the 43 patients, and we found that the patients who were having obstructive sleep apnea, they actually were at higher risk of having the metabolic syndrome compared to the patients who were not having metabolic syndrome. So this study suggested that probably the metabolic syndrome among the patients with the schizophrenia who are on second generation antipsychotic is mediated through obstructive sleep apnea. Now, this is another paper which appeared in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, and it looked at the obstructive sleep apnea and psychiatric disorders. And you can see here in this table that the patients with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorders, they have the higher prevalence of obstructive sleep apnea with a very wide range, because the different kinds of methods were used to diagnose obstructive sleep apnea. The patients, their age, their gender was different, and the length antipsychotic treatment was also different. And lastly, the different molecules in the antipsychotic class, they can have differential effects. Then look at the bipolar disorder patient. Again, we can see that the prevalence of the OSA, the median is somewhere around 20%, which is almost double that of general population. In major depressive disorder, we had the 8 studies, and they clearly mentioned that nearly half of the patients with major depressive disorder, they have comorbid OSA. Similarly, among the anxiety disorder, we had only one study that mentioned that the patients, nearly half of the patients, they have comorbid OSA. And similarly, the patients with PTSD, they have higher prevalence of OSA. Now, last year, the July edition of the Sleep was dedicated to the PTSD and sleep, and their journal contained number of articles which clearly mentions that patients with PTSD, they are having thrice the chances of having the comorbid OSA compared to any other patients. So this is something which is really interesting. Now, when we look at the clinical characteristics of the patients who are having OSA, so I could find this study which was published in the JCSM last year, and this study clearly mentions that the patients with the major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia and psychotic disorder, if we compare these three groups, you can that the patient with psychotic disorder, they have higher BMI, they have larger neck circumference, they have larger waist circumference, and they have their forced volume, vital capacity is lower compared to the other two groups. And if you look at the prevalence of the excessive daytime sleepiness, it is almost comparable among these three groups. Similarly, fatigue severity scale score is almost comparable between these three groups, with an increment in the schizophrenia and psychotic disorder. And as you can see here, in the patients with bipolar disorder, the heads D was slightly higher compared to the MDD group. So you can see here that these patients, they have a difference in their body habitus, and that is a reason that these patients might be predisposed to have obstructive sleep apnea. If we go with the same article, you can see here the effect size. If we look at the different variables which were seen during the polysomnography, you can see here that the that the apneas were actually much higher among the patients with schizophrenia compared to other two disorders. Similarly, the central sleep apneas, obstructive sleep apneas, mixed sleep apneas, all of them, they were much higher among the patients with schizophrenia and psychotic disorder compared to other two groups. And if we look at the mean saturation of oxygen at night, you can see that most of the patients with schizophrenia, they have lower oxygen saturation, which suggests that they were not breathing properly, and they were spending more time below the oxygen saturation of 90%, as you can see here. And this is really interesting that and this clearly suggests that the patients who are having schizophrenia and psychotic disorder, they are at higher risk of having obstructive sleep apnea compared to the patients with major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. In the same study, if we compare the anthropometric parameters, and this is basically the multiple logistic regression, and this shows the effect of the various medications. So N03 means the anti-epileptics, 05 shows the antipsychotics, and 06 shows the antidepressants and the psychostimulants. And you can see here the prevalence of the OSA did not vary with the different kinds of classes. But if we look at the time spent below the 90% of the oxygen, you can see here it was different among different classes, and it was highest among the patients who were on antipsychotics and sedative hypnotics. So this clearly shows that probably antipsychotics, they have some kind of effect on our neural control of respiration, and that actually predisposes these patients to have OSA, but it is not related directly to their obesity. Now, coming to the second section, the prevalence of psychiatric disorders in OSA. And if we look at this meta-analysis, this clearly, which was published last year only, and this clearly mentions that the patients with OSA, they have a higher prevalence of depressive symptoms. Now, again, I'm coming to the depressive symptoms, which varies between 27% to nearly 42%, with the median of 35%, and this definitely outweighs the population prevalence of depression, which is somewhere around 5.6% in India, as per the National Mental Health Survey that we have. Now, the good thing is this paper mentions that AHI is not the best predictors for the depression among these patients. That means it does not depend upon the depressive symptoms. They are not correlated with the severity of the obstructive sleep apnea. But what could predict the presence of depression among the patients with obstructive sleep apnea are the daytime sleepiness, the disruption in the sleep that they report subjectively, and the daytime fatigue that we have, and other objective indices of the OSA severity like the time spent below 90% of the saturation. But this finally this paper argued that the data is lacking to make a conclusive remark. Importantly, whether the diagnosis was of the depression was done using the questionnaires or the clinical diagnosis, it does not influence the prevalence. And similarly, the choice of questionnaires also did not influence the prevalence. But the variability in the studies was seen, which was very high, and that was related to the age included in the study, gender of proportion of the male or the females included in the study, severity of the OSA, obesity, the daytime sleepiness, the questionnaire that was used, and cutoff that were used to determine the depression. So these factors, they influence the prevalence of OSA in these patients. Same meta-analysis also looked at the studies for which have looked for the presence of anxiety among the OSA patient, and as we can see here, the prevalence of anxiety symptoms is also higher than the general population prevalence. But importantly, which diagnostic instrument was used to diagnose anxiety, it did not influence the prevalence of the anxiety symptoms, and the variability was again attributed same factors for which to which attributed for the depression. Now, coming to the clinical depression in the patients with OSA, if we look at, so this is another study, and this clearly mentioned that in the untreated obstructive sleep apnea, the prevalence of depression is much higher than the population prevalence, with the mean of somewhere around 23%. So, which is definitely higher than the population prevalence of 5% in India. If we look at what are the factors that can lead to the the symptoms of depression in the patients with OSA, so this study reported in the multivariate analysis that only the assessment of quality of life it could explain the presence of depression. So the people who reported poor quality of life, they reported higher prevalence of depression. But the other factors like daytime sleepiness, score on the HEDS-D, antidepressant use, past episode of depression, the sleep quality, they did not affect the prevalence of depression in the patients having untreated OSA. Now, importantly, if we look at the cognitive effects of obstructive sleep apnea, because all of us see the patients who are having the obstructive sleep apnea, the cognitive dysfunction, especially the dementia. So here we can find that the OSA has multiple kinds of cognitive dysfunctions. For example, it influences the non-verbal memory to the most, then it influences the concept formation, psychomotor speed, construction ability, executive function, perceptual problems, motor performance, attention the most, and then we can see the speed of processing. So all these kind of dysfunctions, they can also lead to the symptoms, they can also lead to the disability, and which can produce distress, which can be mistaken even for depression and for the anxiety. Now, the next question is why there is an overlap between the OSA and the psychiatric disorders, especially the common psychiatric disorders like psychosis and depression and bipolar disorder. Now, we all know the criteria for obstructive sleep apnea. We usually focus only on the nighttime criteria. That means whether the patient snores or not, whether the spouse reports any witness pauses of events of the breathing, whether the person complains about the choking or snorting, but we rarely ask about the daytime symptoms of obstructive sleep apnea. And daytime symptoms of obstructive sleep apnea, they overlap grossly with that of depression. For example, we can see here that the patients with depression and obstructive sleep apnea both complain of loss of energy, fatigue, daytime sleepiness, poor concentration, memory lapses, a loss of vigor or energy, lack of interest, and many of these patients they complain of weight gain. So these patients, unless we ask about these symptoms, will definitely be put into this class rather than being diagnosed as having OSC. Now, more important is to understand that many patients they have the comorbid OSA with depression. So, when if we diagnose OSA, that does not mean that we should overlook depression. If we diagnose depression, that does not mean that we should overlook OSA. So we should try to look for screen for the OSA among the subjects who are presenting with depression. Also among the patients who are coming with the chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and somatoform disorder. Because many of the patients with the OSA, they have poor sleep quality at night because of repeated microarousals, and that can actually manifest as the somatic symptoms during the daytime, especially the fatigues and pains of multiple sides of the pain. Now, if we look at the overlapping pathophysiology here, we and in the green are shown basically the pathophysiological issues related to the obstructive sleep apnea. So, obstructive sleep apnea leads to the arousal, increases the retention of CO2, reduces the hypoxemia, and increases the negative intrathoracic pressure, which increases the cardiac load, vascular shear stress, and cardiac morbidity. And the same, it also reduces the tissue oxygenation and increases the chemoreceptor activity. That in turn increases the sympathetic activity. That can lead to the insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, metabolic syndrome, and also can lead to the obesity, and obesity can produce inflammation. Similarly, sympathetic activity itself can lead to inflammation, and we all know that depression is also considered as a systematic inflammatory disease. Similarly, the repeated arousals associated with obstructive sleep apnea, they fragment the sleep, which can increase the sympathetic activity, and it creates the imbalance between the parasympathetic and sympathetic activity, which in turn again increases the inflammation, and the depressive symptoms they appear in the patients who are having OSC. If we look at the structural and functional neural adaptations in the patients with OSA, this was a review and meta-analysis which look at the convergent areas. And this, if you can see here in the upper part, this study found that most of the studies using the structural imaging, the task-based imaging, as well as the functional imaging, they found that there is a significant dysfunction and reduction in the cortical volume in the amygdala and the hippocampus. And we all know there's these two areas are important for the emotional memory formation and emotional regulation. And that could be the one reason why the patients with OSA, they feel fatigued, they feel loss of energy, they are at times irritable, and they present with the features which are very similar to that of depression. Second area which was found in the convergent analysis was the right insula, and we all know that the insula is one of the area which is having connections with almost all areas of the brain, including the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, including the hypothalamus, thalamus, and also the ARAS. So this area is another important area which can also lead to the generation of the emotional and cognitive symptoms in patients with obstructive sleep apnea. Now, this was the another, in the second part of this study, they looked at the co-activation and they found that the number of areas were co-activated with the amygdala and the hippocampus. So here we can see that the number of other areas which included, which were co-activated with the amygdala and hippocampus were the other areas of the opposite side. And then we can see the bilateral thalamus, we can see here the cingulate gyrus, we can see here the median prefrontal cortex, we can see here the temporal pole, then we can see here the ascending reticular activating system. All these areas, they were co-activated with the hippocampus and the amygdala, and similarly with the right insula. And this clearly shows that this whole of the networks get dysfunction in the patients with obstructive sleep apnea. And this network is actually responsible for the processing of the emotional memories and also the cognitive processing. So this structure leads to the cognitive and emotional deficits in the patients with obstructive sleep apnea. Now, if we look at the conjugation analysis, then it clearly mentions, you can see here the same kind of areas, they were co-activated and they were hyperactivated, and that led to the dysfunction of that we see patients with OSA. Now, what are the clinical implications from the studies that we have or the evidences that we have looked so far? Now, if we look at the implication, this was an interesting paper from Madhulika Gupta. She has done quite a work in the obstructive sleep apnea and psychiatric disorder. And in this systematic review, they have shown that the patients who were on the psychosis, when they were given treated for the OSA, then the symptoms, they improved. Similarly, they reported that CPAP can also induce the manic episode because probably it improves the brain functioning and reduces the so-called what we see as the depressive symptoms. And then it clearly shows that in the patients with the major depressive disorder, upper uvulopalatopharyngoplasty, it reduces the excessive daytime sleepiness and the depression. Then we know that the CPAP, in the patients who are having OSA comorbid with depression, and we prescribe them the CPAP at the right pressure and their OSA is controlled, then they have significant improvement in their depressive symptoms. And that is the reason it is said in many of the guidelines and systematic reviews that if you get a patient with major depressive disorder who is also having the chance of OSA, please get the patient screened for the obstructive sleep apnea. If the person is having obstructive sleep apnea, treat the patient for OSA. Even after the adequate treatment of the OSA, say after 20 days of the regular use of CPAP for optimal duration, if the person still complains of depressive symptoms, then consider the diagnosis of comorbid depression and start the antidepressant treatment. Similarly, here the CPAP can also reduce the symptom severity of PTSD. Now, this was another paper which was published in Sleep Medicine Reviews, and it was a systematic review and meta-analysis. So it finally came to the conclusion that PAP therapy can improve the depression patients with OSA, but the efficacy is similar to and dental appliances. Now, the benefit of the PAP may be greater in the patients who are having higher depression severity score. That means the patient who might be having greater severity of OSA. And if the symptoms of depression do not improve after the PAP therapy with the improvement of AHI, then depression should be treated using the standard psychiatric therapies. This was another study which looked at the efficacy of the CPAP in the patients with schizophrenia who were having severe OSA. And this showed the 5 patients, and you can see here that many of the patients, they were having the high AHI. Anything more than 30 is considered severe. So they all were in the severe OSA. And after the CPAP, they all the AHI normalized in most of the patient except this one, where it remained in the milder category. Now, if we look at the change in the different the different stages of the sleep, we can see here that after the CPAP, proportion of the slow wave sleep or the deep sleep, it increased significantly in all the patients. And also the REM sleep increased significantly after the CPAP. And the increase in the CPAP and the slow wave is something which we see also in the patients with OSA who are not having any kind of psychiatric disorder. If we look at the adherence to the therapy in the first 6 months of treatment, we can see here that the adherence was good in the first 6 months, and most of the patients, they were having the the leak from the mask, which is also within normal limits, but the average use was actually inadequate, except this one patient who was probably using the CPAP for the whole of the sleep period. Most of the others, they were using for almost half of the sleep period, and that could be the reason that the patients might not have the adequate improvement. If we look at the change in the anthropometric measures, you can see here that after the use of CPAP, the weight actually changed a lot. And one of the reason is that the patients probably they had become active during the daytime. If we look at the BMI, it also reduced significantly in almost all the patients. Waist circumference and neck circumference also reduced. And this clearly shows that CPAP can actually reduce the obesity as well by increasing the energy and allowing the patient to function well during the day. If we look at the sleep quality measures, they were not different across even at the end of the 6 months. But if we look at the change in the psychiatric scales, we can see here that the change in the PENS line was significant, and similarly the change in the PSP, the social performance scale was also significant. So this shows that the use of the CPAP improves the symptoms in the patients. Now, how to recognize the OSA? We have earlier discussed that the patients with OSA, they have nocturnal symptoms and they also have daytime symptoms. So the most common nocturnal symptom that we have is the snoring, and many of these patients, they complain of actually irregular arrhythmic snoring, as you can see here. The patient is snoring, then the intensity changes, then the duration also changes over time. Then pause because the patient is not breathing at all. Then it starts with another snore which is louder and longer than the previous snore, and this is known as snorting. This is opposite to the habitual snoring, where we see that the whole of the snoring episode, they have similar kind of traces, and it has the patient with habitual snoring, they have this part missing in their snoring snorogram. Now, patients with OSA, because they are actually many of them, they are having low arousal threshold, so they keep on having the sleep, and that is a reason that they talk at night. So if a patient complain of sleep talking at night, please screen the patient for some or the other sleep disorder which is disrupting the patient's sleep. Now, this could be because of the stress, this could be because of sleep apnea, this could be because of the periodic limb movement during sleep or the periodic limb movement disorder. This could be because of RLS. This could be because of parasomnia, anything, but this is something which is not normal after the age of 10 years. Now, as we have already discussed in the pathophysiology slides, that the patients with obstructive sleep apnea, because they are breathing against the closed glottis, so they struggle to breathe, and so they are the muscles which are accessory muscles of respiration and the diaphragm really tries hard to get the to inhale, and that actually increases the intrathoracic pressure towards the negative side, and that actually increases the venous return, which increases the preload, and that leads to the secretion of the atrial natriuretic peptide and brain natriuretic peptide. And these two hormones then increases the production of the urine by acting on the kidney, and that is the reason most of the patients with OSA, they complain of nocturnal polyuria. This is different from the nocturia that we see in the patients with BPH who have urgency, hesitancy, and obstruction. But these patients, they complain that they go to washroom two times or three times at night, but they are able to void the urine without any major effort, and they have adequate amount of urine when they void. So this nocturnal polyuria means if a person is having nocturnal polyuria more than two times a night, please screen the patient for the presence of obstructive sleep apnea. Now, as we have already discussed, these patients, they have increased intrathoracic pressure towards the negative side, but when the diaphragm tries pushes hard, so it increases the intra-abdominal pressure towards the positive sides, and that actually increases the chances of the gastroesophageal reflux. So if a patient is having GERD, especially at night, please screen the patient for possible obstructive sleep apnea. This is not normal. Many of these patients complain of loss of libido. Why? We do not know as of now. Many of these patients, because they have the dioxide which is retained in their blood, so that leads to the cerebral vasodilatation. And these patients, many of them, they wake up with a dull heaviness in their head, which improves as the day progresses because now they are breathing normally and the CO2 washes out. Then many of these patients, they are having cognitive dysfunctions, and the reasons for the cognitive dysfunctions we have seen in the structural as well as the functional neuroimaging studies. So the patients, when they are having cognitive dysfunctions, especially the younger patients, please screen them for obstructive sleep apnea. Many of these patients, they complain of fibromyalgia and somatoform disorder, and which improves with the initiation of the CPAP therapy once their sleep normalizes. Then nearly 30% of the patients of the obstructive sleep apnea, they have excessive daytime sleepiness. Unfortunately, we screen for obstructive sleep apnea only when the patient, they have excessive daytime sleepiness. But please remember, the obstructive sleep apnea is having multiple clinical phenotypes. So a paper has mentioned that one third of them, they are asymptomatic, and they do not report anything, and you have to find them out by when they are having the hypertension, or when any their bed partner report obstructive sleep apnea. Second are the group, the one third, who complain of excessive daytime sleepiness, as you can see here, and the remaining third, they complain of just the fatigue but not the daytime sleepiness. Now, once we see the patients might be having the obstructive sleep apnea, we now know the clinical feature. Then how to diagnose? Simplest way to diagnose or the screen obstructive sleep apnea is to use this Berlin questionnaire. This is also available in Hindi, and the simpler version of this Berlin questionnaire is a stop bang questionnaire. So stop bang, S actually stands for the snoring, stands for the tiredness during the day. O stands for observed pauses in the breath during the night, which are usually witnessed by the bed partner. P stands for the pressure or the hypertension. B stands for the BMI, so any BMI more than 25. A stands for age, so age more than 50 years. N stands for the neck circumference, so in the males, the neck circumference at the level of cricothyroid more than 17 inches, and in females more than 15 inches. And G stands for the gender, so the male gender. So if a person complains of snoring, tiredness, observed pauses in the breath, and the hypertension, whether they treated or untreated, and is having BMI more than 25, age more than 50, neck circumference more than 17 in males or more than 15 in females, and the male gender, please give one score of 1 to each positive. And if a person scores more than 3, then it shows that the person is having obstructive sleep apnea or is at higher risk for having obstructive sleep apnea. If the person scores more than 5, that almost always ensures that the person is having obstructive sleep apnea. Now we do the polysomnography. Now we have different kind of polysomnography, and these days you can find the people from various manufacturers of the CPAP. Now these people are offering for the home polysomnography. Please remember, home polysomnography is not the routine procedure for most of the patients with obstructive sleep apnea. Obstructive sleep apnea should always be diagnosed by the attended polysomnography, which is done once the patient are admitted in the sleep laboratory. So in the sleep laboratory, when we do the polysomnography, we record at least 6 channels of the EEG, as you can see here. We record the 2 channels of the electrooculogram. It's only one is shown here. We record the chin EMG. We record the EMG from the anterior tibialis. We record the snoring from the snore mic. We record the respiration from the nose. We record the chest movement, abdominal movement. Here you can see that during the obstructive sleep apnea, here the person is not breathing at all. So this line is flat compared to, you can see here some breathing here and some breathing here, which is associated with the snoring. So during this apneic period, patients are having the paradoxical movement of the chest and the abdomen because the diaphragm is trying really hard to inhale the air. And at the end of the obstructive sleep apnea, there is oxygen desaturation, and there is also, you can see here, change in the heart rate. So here is some tachycardia and there is some bradycardia during the periods of the sleep apnea. And we also record the body position. We record, you can see here, we record the video whole night using the infrared camera. So this way we record the whole of all the different kind of physiological function that occur haywire during the sleep. And this is the gold standard for diagnosing the sleep apnea. Now, once we diagnose the sleep apnea, how to manage? There can be conservative management like weight management and positional therapy. Unfortunately, weight management and positional therapy have not been found consistently effective in the treatment of sleep apnea. So they are always used as an adjunct to the main therapy. Then nowadays we have some dental devices which can pull the mandible forward and increase the caliber of the upper airway. Then we have certain surgeries, and then finally we have certain PEP machines. So as we have discussed that the weight management, it is very easy to lose weight once. But the problem is most of the patients, once they reach the target weight, they actually lose their control over the exercise and over the diet, and then they put on weight most of the time. So even the international studies clearly mention that weight management is not a very good strategy because patients are not able to maintain their weight once they lose the weight. Similarly, the positional therapy is ineffective. There are multiple devices which are available for the lateral positioning of the patients, but these devices have not been found consistently effective across the studies. Coming to the PEP therapy, here you can see that this is a positive airway pressure machine, and this actually blows the air on a positive pressure through the hose pipe, which actually delivers the air to the upper airway using this interface, and this is known as the mask. Now with this mask, the machine blows the air inside the nasal cavity, and this positive pressure of the air actually works as the air splint, and it pushes the tongue and the soft palate forward so that the posterior airway is open and the patient can breathe against this open airway. Now, many of the physicians now are using the AutoPEP, but again, there are certain issues with the use of AutoPEP that we will discuss. So we usually titrate the pressure of the PEP, at what pressure the patient is not having snoring, at what time the patient, at what pressure the patient is not having any kind of apneic or hypopneic episode, and at what pressure the patient is not having any kind of micro arousal. And that is the target pressure that we give to the patient to be used when he's sleeping at night. Now, coming to the autopep, these days you might be seeing that most of the pulmonologists, neurologists, and some of our colleagues as well are getting the sleep studies from the patients who are manufactured, from the people who are representing the manufacturers of these PEP devices. And once they do the sleep study, they do not give you the raw data, so you are not able to see whether the study was done properly or not. I get so many patients who come with very vague reports, and when we do the re-study in our own lab, many of these patients are actually not having sleep apnea. And these patients are then given the autopep. And please remember, the autopep is a machine which increases or reduces the pressure depending upon whether the person is having snoring or the person is having some increased impedance in the breathing or the airflow or the contour of the flow. So these are basically these different autopep machines. They have they follow different kind of algorithms which are not disclosed because of the proprietary issues and the patent issues. So the devices cannot be compared. And the use of autopep is actually contraindicated in the patients who are having the CHF, COPD, obesity hyperventilation syndrome, central sleep apnea. And similarly, the autopep is not recommended for the diagnosis of OSA for the patients who are non-snorers and after the split night titration. And even when you are using the autopep for some or the other reason, then it is really important that you follow the patients closely for their clinical symptoms and you change the pressure. And if the symptoms persist, then the manual titration is necessary. So there is, as of now, there is no data which suggests that autopep is better than the CPAP, despite the fact that it is almost twice costly compared to CPAP. So finally, coming to the summary, we have seen the evidence that the psychiatric disorders, they overlap with that of obstructive sleep apnea. Either of them are frequently missed depending upon whether the patient is coming to the psychiatrist or going to the neurologist or pulmonologist. But for adequate management of the patient, both should be addressed. Attended PSG is the gold standard technique for diagnosing obstructive sleep apnea. PEP is still the most effective therapy, despite the fact that many of the ENT surgeons, they are now doing the soft tissue surgery. Now, the guidelines regarding the soft tissue surgery clearly mention that the soft tissue surgery should be done only after the failed attempt of CPAP, because nearly 50% of the patient after the soft tissue surgery on the uvula and the tongue, they have recurrence of OSA within 1 year. And this I'm talking about the best of the centers in the world. So the soft tissue surgery is not recommended, and PEP is still the most effective therapy. And if we treat both the disorders at the same time, that it can lead to improvement in the psychiatric symptom as well as the comorbid health issues which can arise because of the psychiatric symptoms or because of the obstructive sleep apnea. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you once again. Thank you very much.
That was excellent, Dr. Gupta. So
Thank
if
you.
I were to quickly recap what you said, you almost said that obstructive sleep apnea is like termite on the brain.
Right, sir.
It affects everything. It affects metabolism, it contaminates quality of life, it produces cognitive symptoms, it generates anxiety. And the disease, whatever the underlying psychiatric morbidity, takes a chronic course, and there are residual symptoms if there is comorbid OSA. And you did mention that there are neurological correlates, though I couldn't figure out the cause-effect relationship between the neurological correlates and the OSA. Does the abnormal neurology cause OSA, or the OSA causes the abnormal neurology? And then you made a very important point that in the event of a person manifesting with anxiety, depression, and OSA symptoms, treat the OSA and then assess the severity of underlying anxiety or depression. Otherwise, you might get misled, and treatment of the OSA itself can take away several symptoms. And you were so clear on the positive air pressure techniques, so I couldn't understand the difference between CPAP and BiPAP. You said that the physical, metabolic, and parameters improve with CPAP, and you gave us some clue about how to screen and the relevance of polysomnography. Uh, this is excellent presentation, and you made it very clear that OSA needs to be taken good care of. I'm sure I'm not just sure, I know there are a whole lot of questions, and probably Dr. Das or Dr. Majid would put them up to you so that you can tell us a little more. But even as you tell me that, please tell me, do women get it as often as men, or is it only for the men?
Okay.
When I was a kid, my grandmother used to tell me, "Choti gardan lamb pichani, haram khor ki ek nishani." And from what you say, "Choti gardan lamb pichani, OSA ki ek nishani."
बिल्कुल सर, आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा है. If you look at the prevalence of OSA before the menopause, the prevalence is higher among males. But after the menopause, the prevalence is almost comparable between male and females, because they also tend to put on weight after the menopause.
Dr. Majid, Dr. Das, please.
Yeah, Mamin, I would definitely like to congratulate Dr. Gupta. It has been a very comprehensive presentation, very elaborate, and it has given us a new idea and a new orientation regarding sleep disorders. I'm really thankful once again, for choosing this particular topic. One thing I'd like to clear from Dr. Gupta, regarding schizophrenia and OSA, is there any study where OSA has been found before treatment of schizophrenia? Because most of the studies that you have shared here today, everything has been related to schizophrenic who are undergoing treatment. Before receiving the treatment, before they gain weight because of the metabolic syndrome due to the treatment, is there any, or are there any studies where schizophrenia and OSA, they present as a comorbid condition, or vice versa? Is there any?
To my knowledge, I do not see any such study. Which I mean, if we look at this study, one of the methodology could be to longitudinally follow up the patients with the obstructive sleep apnea and who develop later on schizophrenia. But as of now, not to my knowledge, there is any study has been done.
No, I mean, suppose a patient comes with a schizophrenic symptom, and we diagnose him first time, say, as a schizophrenia. And before initiating the treatment, is there any study that schizophrenic patient also has got a OSA as a comorbid condition? Because all the studies that you have been mentioned. So in this case, because studies are related to the weight gain, one theory that you have mentioned, could it be that it is not directly related to schizophrenia?
Sir, could be, because there have been some studies regarding the metabolic syndrome, and these studies, they show that patients with schizophrenia, they are having metabolic syndrome even before starting the antipsychotics.
Yes.
So it could be, it is an indirect evidence, but I did not see any study which has directly looked for the obstructive sleep apnea at the baseline when the patient is having schizophrenia symptoms.
So in this case, again, one curiosity, just query, I'd like to clarify one point. A patient with different kind of a psychiatric disorder, maybe depression, anxiety related disorder, schizophrenia, in those cases, if we find OSA as a concomitant, a comorbid condition, what about treating them with benzodiazepines or any other sedatives, hypnotics? You have mentioned about that, but what is your take on that? Can we very freely prescribe all these medications?
Sir, when it comes to the benzodiazepines, there are two different schools of thoughts. One school of thought says that benzodiazepines should be avoided in patients with OSA because they can reduce.
That's what I've been doing in my clinical practice.
Yeah, because they actually reduces the tone of the upper airway. But there are a number of studies in past 10 years which clearly mention that many of the patients with the OSA who are having low arousal threshold and they are having recurrent microarousals. And that actually worsens the OSA. So by giving any of the hypnotic medication, we can actually reduce the severity of OSA in those patients.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, the issue is probably at what doses are we prescribing the benzodiazepines? Are we prescribing them at the doses where they actually cause the reduced tone of the muscles, or we are using just to induce the sleep?
Okay, so just to induce the sleep, we can very clearly we can prescribe benzodiazepines.
Of course.
There is no contraindications. A clear-cut blanket contraindication is not there.
No, sir, no.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gupta. Thank you once again, and congratulations for your comprehensive presentation. Over to Dr. Mazid, please.
Dr. Jayanta, thank you very much for the valuable comments. And I think we have a lot of questions I can see, and which have to be actually then finally we have to choose the best question. And what I could understand from, as usual, the lucid presentation made by Ravi Gupta is very crystal clear whenever he presents any topic, particularly related to sleep. And I could understand that anybody having OSA and you adding sedating type of antidepressants, or for that matter benzodiazepines, could act as a double-edged sword. That time it can worsen actually the both. So we need to be very careful once we are choosing treatment for OSA with depression, and first of all to differentiate between the two. So take up questions, so that, because we'll not be awarded in any case, neither Jayanta nor me, for having the best question, but we have questions being asked there. And to start with the questions, we had the first one from Dr. B. Ramesh Babu, who asks that is there any protocol or diagnostic criteria to predict the occurrence of OSA in newly diagnosed hypothyroid patient? If so, how to quantify the severity, and what parameters are to be taken into consideration to have a treatment plan?
Okay. So when it comes to the diagnosis of OSA, you can go for the clinical diagnosis as we have discussed. You can also use the Berlin questionnaire or the stop bank questionnaires as we have discussed. For the assessment of the severity, as of now, we have the only criteria is the apnea hypopnea index. And for that, actually, you have to go for the polysomnography.
Okay. So what about the treatment plan? What are the parameters to be taken into consideration?
When we plan the treatment, we actually look at the severity of the OSA and the clinical impact of the OSA. So, I mean, it's not the gold, I mean, it's not the yardstick about the, which is gold standard, but currently we say that if the patient is having the apnea hypopnea index ranging between 6 to 15, then it's a mild OSA. If the patient is having apnea hypopnea index or the AHI between 16 to 30, it is moderate, and more than 30 is severe OSA. So any patient having the mild OSA and is having daytime symptoms like excessive daytime sleepiness, poor quality of life, poor quality of sleep, should be given treatment. And all the patients, irrespective of their daytime symptoms, having the moderate to severe OSA, should be offered treatment. And the treatment depends upon, which is individualized, depends upon patient to patient. But the most commonly we prescribe is the CPAP therapy. But yes, if the person is having some kind of say problem with their structural problem like retrognathia, micrognathia, protrusion of maxilla, so these patients should be actually offered the surgical treatment for which is the maxillomandibular advancement. And the bony surgery is definitely having much better prognosis compared to the soft tissue surgery.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. Thank you very much. We have another question from Gibran Sheikh. Can sleep apnea be the reason for anger issues?
Well, always just imagine if you are not having good sleep at one night or couple of nights, what kind of behavior does you have? We all become irritable. And the same is the issue with the patients who are having threshold. Some of the patients, they are having a high arousal threshold, so they don't have the repeated micro arousal. So they sleep well even at night, even when they are having sleep apnea. But the patient with low arousal threshold, they are deprived of their sleep and they are definitely irritable.
Correct. So there is a query from Dr. Ganeshan Ramaswamy, that is pranayama beneficial for OSA?
Yes, sir, there have been some studies which suggest that pranayama could be beneficial for the OSA. There have been some, and that led to the generation of some of the tongue and the upper airway exercises, and these have been found to be some partially effective in the patient with OSA. But yes, I think these kind of exercises they are beneficial to one particular subset of patient, and as of now we do not know that characteristic because the data is not that robust.
Okay. So there is one question from Dr. Farhana. As the symptoms of depression and OSA are similar, like fatigue, lack of concentration, disturbed sleep, and etc., etc., how can we really differentiate clinically between the two on the first visit of the patient?
Okay. So the most consistent symptom that the patient with depression report is the sadness of the mood. Now, this sadness is actually different from the udasi that we use in Hindi. Udasi, and so whenever sad mood to me, I usually ask, are you referring to the tiredness or the genuine sadness that occurs after you lose someone whom you love? So I think that is the one thing that differentiates between the patient with the OSA and depression. Secondly, other cognitive distortions that the patient with depression have, like guilt, hopelessness, these are usually uncommon in patients with OSA. But as the studies have clearly mentioned, that if you are suspecting comorbidity, treat OSA first and then look for, keep a track of the depressive symptoms, keep a track of the use of PEP machine. And if you are, if you are sure that the patient is using the PEP machine for optimal duration, not having, say, improper leaks, then and the patient is still complaining of depressive symptoms, then treat the patient for the with the antidepressants as we usually do.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. Dr. Santokh Singh has asked a question. First of all, he has appreciated the wonderful presentation you have put forward in front of us. Secondly, had asked a question that in individuals with OSA and psychiatric illness, should we treat the both disorders together,
And
be considered for the optimal treatment outcomes?
of course, undoubtedly.
So we should treat both disorders
So,
simultaneously.
of course, otherwise we will actually, as the clearly, we discussed that you can be misled by the symptoms of the OSA for as the residual symptoms of depression or negative symptoms of schizophrenia or psychosis.
Correct. Thank you. Dr. Prerek has raised a query. Do excessive caffeine and carbonated drinks consumption lead to OSA? Any studies about it?
No, not to my knowledge. At least caffeine does not lead to it. But yes, the carbonated beverages, because if they are having the sugar content as well, that can lead to the weight gain, and that can in turn be a risk factor for having the OSA.
Yeah. So she has added that how can we differentiate nocturia of OSA from diabetes mellitus? I feel it would be obvious that blood sugars have to be done, and you can be sure that it's diabetes
No, but
mellitus
always
nocturia.
remember the patients with diabetes, even if they are having uncontrolled sugar, they never go for the low in the night. The reason
Right.
is in the night we are not eating, and that actually reduces the level of the blood sugar. So that cannot lead to the osmotic diuresis at night. Most of the patients with diabetes, they have osmotic diuresis or the polyuria during the day only. So if somebody complains of nocturnal polyuria, please look for some kind of trouble, which is, and then one of them is the most common is the obstructive sleep apnea.
Okay. So, Dr. Santokh has another question for you that what are the chances that patients presenting with diagnosed depressive syndromes may also have OSA and vice versa?
Well, it is very difficult. The studies are having different kind of proportions. The reason dependent upon the sampling method, sampling strategy, and the questionnaire used, method used to diagnose OSA or the depression. But yes, all the studies, they agree that the prevalence is much higher than the population prevalence. So at least in my practice, I actually screen every patient for the possibility of OSA, especially if the person is obese, if the person is having some kind of the structural problem with the in the craniofacial region. It is always good practice to peep inside the mouth of the patient.
There is one question from our colleague from Bhopal, Dr. Roma Bhattacharya. Can underweight people also suffer from OSA?
Of course, ma'am. I mean, you can see children who are having the adenoid hypertrophy or tonsillar hypertrophy, and they are having, I mean, severe OSA, even in absence of the desired obesity, what we usually consider. Similarly, patients with micrognathia, retrognathia, retrusion of maxilla, all of them, they are predisposed to have OSA. Similarly, patients who are having macroglossia, they are also having OSA despite the fact that their body weight is otherwise normal.
Okay. There is one question from Dr. Sharad Vasant. Comorbid depression is more likely than schizophrenia. What is your take on that?
Yes, of course. I mean, we have to understand that the research, this is actually a new area for the research. I mean, we have limited number of studies which have been done in this regard, and unfortunately, the heterogeneity is quite high. So, I mean, it's very difficult to say whether it is more prevalent among depression or among schizophrenia. But yes, the prevalence is high. That is okay. I mean, that is something what we can say as of now.
Okay. So Dr. Sumitra Biswas is asking a question that in your presentation, you mentioned that patient diagnosed as OSA and on treatment with CPAP, we should wait for at least period of 20 days. And if depressive symptoms persist, we should diagnose as comorbid depression. Now, the question is that while treating a patient of depression, when should we really look for screening of OSA in patients not responding to antidepressants?
Of course.
Is there any time frame? Is there any time frame?
I mean, it's very difficult to say time frame because we do not have any literature in that regard. But this clearly says that the patients, if they are not responding optimally to your therapies, then look for some kind of alternative. I mean, you should try to review the diagnosis.
Okay. So we will take, I think, the final question because we are only 6 minutes left into the session, and it is from Dr. Mayur. The question is there any preferred antidepressant for patients with OSA, with comorbid depression? What is your experience?
You can use any antidepressant, but I mean, just ensure that it does not lead to further weight gain, because that can further worsen the obstructive sleep apnea and can change the CPAP pressure which is required.
Okay. So I think if there is any other comment from my honored chairpersons, Professor Vahia, Jayanta Das, and if Vahia sir and we could actually somewhere zero on the best question so that he or she could be awarded. Sir, you are muted.
You have put me in a very tough situation. Actually, Banai has made a mistake, and instead of just one award, they should have had about 5 or 6 of them. All the questions were great. And the reason why the questions were great is because the presentation was superb. And you left no point unanswered. And in spite of that, people's curiosity did rise, and some very interesting questions came up. There was one about how to differentiate the nocturia of diabetes versus sleep apnea, or the question of how to diagnose clinical indicators. But one question which struck me as rather eye-opening is that we always talk of weight gain with obstructive sleep apnea. And we always talk of age group of 40s and 50s for sleep apnea. But that sleep apnea can occur in underweight people and in childhood. And that question came up with, I think, was it
Roma Bhattacharya.
whoever, yeah. So I thought that was a question which was slightly different from the routine question which one hears on presentations. On everybody speaks of overweight and short. Nobody thinks of underweight
box.
and sleep apnea. I think that was a real eye-opening question to me, and I would probably give Dr. Bhattacharya the award if everybody else agrees.
So there is no, I think, an iota of doubt in that. and we
That's a
fully
wonderful
agree.
observation, sir, on your part. Routine question, benzodiazepines, anxiolytic, difference between depression and schizophrenia and OSP. I think that is a different, yes, out of the box kind of a questions. I agree with you, sir. I'll go with you.
Thank you, sir.
What
No,
about
the
Dr.
question-
Majid? I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No reason to disagree with Professor Wahiya at all. So the winner for today, as please, Dr. Wahiya, can you announce it?
The winner for the best question of e-voucher of 5,000 rupees from Amazon today goes to Dr. Ruma Bhattacharya for the question asked of, can underweight people also suffer from OSA? Dr. Bhattacharya, I think I know you personally, and you really deserve this.
But
Congratulations.
it was not a biased sort of a choice, because we
I
know
wasn't
her very
sure
well.
who would ask the question when I give this award. Yeah.
Yeah,
Congratulations, Dr. Ruma Bhattacharya.
Great. So thank you very much, everybody, particularly Dr. Ravi Gupta, for a wonderful presentation, for a lucid presentation. And the spice was added by, in fact, started by Professor Vihang Wahiya, and the presence of lovely, charming, handsome Jayanta Das, all the way from Guwahati.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, so it was a lovely session in the evening. I think the participants would have enjoyed it, and the most enjoyed, I think, would have been, and with an added flavor, would have been 5,000 voucher to Dr. Roma Bhattacharya. Thank you very much. If any last thoughts by Professor Wahiya or Professor Jayanta, for
Dr.
that matter,
Majid,
Dr.
why do you not take the compliment yourself? You've been excellent in all
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
Arre,
The same
sir,
thing goes
sir,
to you too.
Sir,
And
आपसे ही सीखा है.
handsome.
Just learning from you, sir.
You to deserve compliments for your handsome,
Thank-
you know.
Thank you very much. Thank
Handsome
you very
Dr.
much.
Majid.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
It's all team effort.
Thank you,
very
Wahiya,
much.
sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Good night.
Good night, sir. Good night.
Thank
The
you,
speaker,
everyone.
please, the speaker made the
Over-
lovely evening. Gupta Sahab,
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you very much, sir. Good night, sir.
Over to organizers.
Any final comment? The Banai host would like
Sure,
to
Yeah,
make?
yeah.
sure, sir. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And we really hope to see you again on coming Tuesday, 19th January 2021. The same date and time. And the topic for the upcoming webinar would be the evidence-based management of cognitive deficits in psychiatric disorders other than dementia by Dr. Naren Rao. And till then, stay safe. Good night to everyone. Thank you so much.
Stay well,
Thank you.
very
Good
much.
night, everybody.